After an action of violence, we are just as likely to hear the phrase, "we are better than that," about as often as thoughts and prayers. The problem is we're not better than that. This is Breaking History. I'm Mark Trahant. As many of you know, I write daily rhymes on Instagram. This practice started when I was editor of the Seattle Post-Intelligencer's editorial page. Then I stopped. When I was editing Indian Country Today, I was just too busy. A few months ago, an author called me about a book on journalism and poetry, and he included my rhymes. And I thought, wow, that's a call to get back at it. So I started again. A rhyme from this week. Can we quell this fervor of hate? Easy access to guns sets our fate. Then social media turns up the dial, making the other the one who's vile. After an action of violence, we are just as likely to hear the phrase, "we are better than that," about as often as thoughts and prayers. The problem is, we are not better than that. Violence is our history. This is Breaking History. As they say in the digital space, like, share, and subscribe. I'm Mark Trahant. It seems like an awful time for political violence. Charlie Kirk's murder, the killing of the Minnesota House Speaker Melissa Hortman and her husband, as well as the shooting of State Senator John Hoffman and his wife. This is a country that has always had a problem with violence. Roughly 20,000 people are murdered every year with firearms. There have been 47 school shootings just this year. And according to the Sandy Hook Promise Group, more than 390,000 students have been exposed to gun violence at school since the century began. During the last century's first pandemic, the U.S. experienced Red Summer. It was 1919. Mob violence was unrestrained. Attacks on African Americans in Washington, Knoxville, Omaha, Chicago, and more than a dozen other cities resulted in hundreds of deaths. The Associated Press came up with the term Red Summer because it was the bloodiest white-on-black violence in this country's history. The mob is one thing, but so much of our history is state violence against people. The Centers for Disease Control and Prevention reported a few years ago that Native Americans make up less than 1% of the population. But from 2009 through 2019, Indigenous people were 2.2 times more likely to be killed by police than white people, and 1.2 times more likely than black people. Of course, the CDC official would be fired for reporting those numbers today, and Charlie Kirk would have celebrated. It's sad that he was murdered, but it's also true that he said awful things about human beings who were also killed. Even now, there are mixed messages about violence in America. President Donald J. Trump told CNBC Thursday that the nation would heal, but he also posted a nasty video.
For years, those on the radical left have compared wonderful Americans like Charlie to Nazis and the world's worst mass murderers and criminals. This kind of rhetoric is directly responsible for the terrorism that we're seeing in our country today, and it must stop right now.
Violence is never one-sided. President Trump didn't bother to acknowledge those on the left who've been murdered or attacked, just for a day or even for 10 minutes. Can we have a president of the United States who can articulate compassion for all of the country's citizens? Last week, the president bragged that violence had been eliminated in Washington, D.C. after his military takeover.
So right now we went from one of the most, and some people say the worst, the most violent city. Can you imagine our capital being the most violent city? But it was really bad, into a totally safe zone. It's called a safe zone city. There's no crime. They said crime's down 87%. I said, no, it's more than 87%. Virtually nothing. And much lesser things that take place in the home they call crime. You know, they'll do anything they can to find something. If a man has a little fight with the wife, they say this was a crime, see? So now I can't claim 100%.
This is our American culture of violence. A study by the FBI using data from the National Incident-Based Reporting System from 2021 to 2023 examined the violent and sexual crimes of murder, aggravated assault, rape, sexual assault with an object, sodomy, fondling, and intimidation, often crimes that take place in the home. Law enforcement reported some 25,817 incidents by intimate partners of violent crime, and 8,575 incidents of sexual crimes against victims who are American Indian or Alaska Native females. There has been a universal condemnation of Kirk's murder, as there should be. But there's also that return to the old American story, we are better than this. That story is not accurate. Kelly Carter Jackson, an associate professor of Africana Studies at Wellesley College, penned a 2022 essay for Daedalus, the Journal of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. It is impossible to bring about change and transformation without the forfeiture of power. The real bondage was not the chains of the enslaved, but the political, economic, social, and psychological stronghold of white supremacy. But until America reckons with this disturbing fact that freedom for Black Americans has been largely achieved through violence, these invaluable lessons will remain largely untaught and wholly unlearned. And it's those political chains that remain, and indeed are championed by the current regime that holds power in the United States. Better than that, would find a way to make the kind of structural changes that would get at the problem.
Last month in Minnesota, a gunman opened fire on a Catholic school children praying. Again, thoughts and prayers are offered. But what do we say? What do we do when the victims were already praying? This cannot be our only response. We need substantive action.
The CDC has limits about what it can even study about gun violence as a public health crisis. A ban on the topic was lifted in 2021, but Congress has yet to appropriate adequate funding to do the work. If funding for research on gun violence were comparable to spending on research on other leading causes of death, such as liver disease or high blood pressure, it would have received $1.4 billion from 2004 to 2015. Instead, federal agencies only provided $22 million in funding for research on gun violence, almost 64 times less, according to the House Joint Economic Committee. So it starts with studying the problem, and then maybe we can say, yes, please, we really can be better. I'm Mark Trahant, and this is Breaking History.